If somebody is disadvantaged, that means necessarily that somebody else is advantaged. Not that everybody, not that the ruling class is neutral and then women and minorities, whatever, are just, below. It's not that. There's an elevation of a particular class of citizens and a degradation of the other ones, right? And so if you are in control and there's a feminist movement to equalize things, equal doesn't work like this, it works like this. Because you have people who are getting unearned advantages, and they don't want to give up those unearned advantages. And so what they would do, again, is the best thing to do if you're in control and there's something coming against your control is to demonize it, make everybody not like it.
I think we live in a culture of fear, and something that many people fear is the power of women, or the power of someone claiming. I think there is this perception that there's only so much in the world to be had, and if you share it with someone, you're going to give up what you got, and people are protective of what they have. So I don't know who to point my finger at, except to fundamentalists who believe ideologically that women are not equal to men, or don't deserve the same rights, or must inhabit a very prescribed role in the world, which eliminates them from issues of power. But we really believe that the future of the world depends on women being given their rights, women taking their rights, if that's necessary.
There were a lot of men and women too who were scared to death that women were going to take over. They were just scared of the whole idea. Lots of women, believe that men should be the boss and they belong to religions or whatever. They fought like mad. And it was a woman, a lawyer, her name was Phyllis Schlafly, she's still around, Schlafly, who went around telling people that this was going to be a terrible thing for women to have equal rights, that we didn't need equal rights in the Constitution of the United States. And she said, if women have equal rights, get this, men and women will have to share restrooms. There will be homosexual marriages, and women will have to go in the service. This was how many years ago? 30, 40 years ago? And what's happening today? Men and women share restrooms. There are homosexual marriages, and women go into the service. So this had nothing to do with the Equal Rights Amendment. But the stigma was there that they said, they tried to put us down by saying we were butchy and ugly, and they used it like mad. And don't you remember there was this guy, Rush Limbaugh? He still exists.
Feminazi.
He has a radio program. He called us feminazis, and they were just, I don't know, they were really afraid. But the majority of men in the United States, intelligent men, understand and are with us, Again, it's just a question of where are they, where are they?
And so over time, what has happened is the people who are not happy with the feminist agenda have turned this idea of women who went out and burned their bras and said, well, that's what all feminists do, and all feminists are hippie kind of people, and all feminists, it's taking the collective and making them all the little soundbite. And I think that's what has happened. And over time, it's gotten to the point where the very word itself, it has a negative connotation. But it's interesting when I talk to young women about it, and I'll say, are you a feminist? Oh no, I'm not a feminist, but.
Feminism has fought no wars. It has killed no opponents. It has set up no concentration camps, starved no enemies, practiced no cruelties. Its battles have been for education, for the vote, for better working conditions, for safety on the streets, for reproductive rights, for child care, for social welfare, for rape crisis centers, women's refugees, reforms in the law. If someone says, oh, I'm not a feminist, I ask, why? What's the problem? Dale Spender, 1985.
The women's movement, as we refer to it now, can arguably be called one of the most successful movements of the last century, the 20th century, and it is successful in more than one way. But perhaps the most tangible evidence of that is that women's rights have become a sort of desirable good or a desirable commodity, something that in the company of civilized nations you are proud to kind of hold up as a model of what you've achieved, much in the way that democracy has become that sort of global good or a desirable element.
One of the earliest feminist works of literature or philosophy, Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, was written in 1792. In it, Wollstonecraft responds to the educational and political theorists of the 18th century who wanted to deny women an education and argues that women are not naturally inferior to men, but appear to be only because they lack education. She suggests that both men and women should be treated as rational beings and imagines a social order founded on reason. Instead of viewing women as ornaments to society or property to be traded in marriage, Wollstonecraft maintains that they are human beings deserving of the same fundamental rights as men. The world's first organized movement on behalf of women was inaugurated in 1848, where a good number of women activists got together to establish in America the first women's rights convention held in a sleepy village of Seneca Falls, New York. After 2 days of discussion and debate in a small chapel, 68 women and 32 men signed a declaration of sentiments which outlines grievances that later set the agenda for the women's rights movement. A set of 12 resolutions is adopted calling for equal treatment of women and men under the law and voting rights for women. The United States at that time barred women from attending all but a few institutions of higher education, a right to own property, a right to vote in elections, an opportunity to participate in legislative bodies, and even the right to divorce. The first wave of feminism begins. In 1868, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton formed the National Women's Suffrage Association, and Lucy Stone forms the American Women's Suffrage Association, which the two will later merge for the primary goal of the organizations, to achieve voting rights for women. Soon the suffragists begin to get national attention for their cry. However, the three women do not live to see their goal achieved. The word feminism originated in 1892 at the First International Women's Conference in Paris. Following the French term féministe, it was used to connote belief in and advocacy of equal rights based upon the idea of equality of the sexes. However, feminists have subsisted unlabeled for centuries. Feminists, feminist groups, and liberation movements share the credit. Because most feminists are women, the matter has mistakenly become a man-woman issue instead of a feminist-non-feminist one. This veils the ultimate matter of human rights with a sexual divide. Moreover, the societal definition of feminism is made tantamount to a hatred for men. Male bashing and women bashing are commonplace. This disservice segregates the sexes and devalues the voices of women. In 1916, another woman's issue is taken into initiative where Margaret Sanger opens the first birth control clinic in New York City. And in 1921, Margaret Sanger founds the American Birth Control League, which later evolves into Planned Parenthood Federation of America. In 1920, after 70 years of organized civil activism, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, granting women the right to vote, is finally signed into law. The first wave of feminism ends.
At the present time, it is of paramount importance that the women and girls of our country be given training so that they may do their share in the war emergency. How this training is given and who does it is of great interest to us all.
Feminism seemed to die in 3 and 4 decades after women won their right to vote. It was a premature death. As one feminist theorist proposed, By the time the granddaughters of the women who have sacrificed so much for suffrage had grown to maturity, not only had mythology firmly ensconced women in the home, but the very term feminist had become an epithet. In 1923, Alice Paul drafts the first proposal of Equal Rights Amendment, an amendment to the United States Constitution intended to guarantee equal rights under the law for the Americans, regardless of sex. Due to controversy up to this day, the ERA had not been ratified. In 1935, Mary McLeod Bethune organizes the National Council of Negro Women, a coalition of black women's groups that lobbies against job discrimination, racism, and sexism. A new fight within the feminist debate begins to take place. After the first wave, women began to get tired after so many hard and focused activisms in granting women just their right to vote. With the Great Depression and the Second World War now a reality, suffragists turned feminists put their issues aside and focused their attentions and energies on the real aftermath of the country. The main women's organizations that were used as energy for the first wave of feminism disintegrated, and feminism enters a long period of dormancy. Several important feminist books are published during these dark ages, notably works by Virginia Woolf and Mary Beard. And clusters of women here and there continue to carry on the fight. But as a serious topic of discussion or study, feminism all but disappears. Feminist leaders vanish into virtual oblivion, their struggle nearly forgotten. It wasn't until a decade and a half after the atomic bombs detonates that put World War II to an end did active-minded women begin to come out and continue the fight for a feminist freedom.
The first indications of a feminist reawakening appeared after World War II. The United Nations affirmed the equal rights of men and women in its 1945 chapter, and a few years later established the UN Commission on the Status of Women to advance this ideal. In 1949, Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, is published and immediately attracts readers and is discussed by women everywhere. In it, de Beauvoir argues that women throughout history have been defined as the other sex, an aberration from the normal male sex. In 1960, the United States Food and Drug Administration approved birth control pills. Although in the early 60s feminism was still an unmentionable, its ghost was slowly awakening from the dead. The first sign of new life came with the establishment of the Commission on the Status of Women by President John F. Kennedy in 1961, where Kennedy appoints Eleanor Roosevelt as chairwoman. The report issued by the Commission in 1963 documents substantial discrimination against women in the workplace and makes specific recommendations for improvement, including fair hiring practices, pay equity, pay maternity leave, and affordable child care. In 1963, Betty Friedan writes The Feminist Mystique, the year's most controversial New York Times bestseller. The second wave of feminism begins. In the book, Friedan instills a view of the problem with no name that has degenerated a society in placing women in ideal roles of the homemaker and housewife, forever leaving them subjected and subjugated in mediocre second-rate roles, if not psychological torment. Moreover, Friedan attacks the popular notion that women during this time of the early Cold War era could only find fulfillment through childbearing and homemaking. It was said later that the book not only ignited the contemporary women's movement in 1963, but as a result permanently transformed the social fabric of the United States and developed countries around the world. In 1963, the same year Friedan's book is published, Congress passes the Equal Pay Act, making it illegal for employers to pay a woman less than what a man would receive for the same job. However, today women make up to 77 cents to every dollar a man makes for the same exact job and with the same exact qualifications. In 1964, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act bars discrimination in employment on the basis of race and sex. At the same time, it establishes the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that investigates complaints and imposes penalties. In 1966, activist Betty Friedan is back in the national spotlight after founding the National Organization for Women with Reverend and lawyer Pauli Murray and a number of other women. NOW is today's largest feminist organization in the United States. The organization's implied purpose is to take action to bring women into full participation in the mainstream of American society now, exercising all privileges and responsibilities thereof in truly equal partnership with men. In 1967, the federal government extends the affirmative action policy of 1965 to cover discrimination based on gender. In 1971, the social conscious Gloria Steinem